And we're waiting for the shark to come back up, which is really boring video. Of course, many of you know differently, right? Who jumped? Well, the shark came back up, but it wasn't the one we were tracking. That's the vehicle screaming.
Tonight, Greg will be talking to us about work that he's been doing recently here in our own backyard, looking at white shark, biology and ecology. But most of you probably don't know that Greg has been studying sharks for a lot longer, for the past 30 years about. And he actually studied a variety of species, not just white sharks. In 1990, he got his master's studying blue sharks, and for the earlier part of his career, he worked at the National Marine Fisheries Service Apex Predators Program in Narragansett, Rhode Island.
Thank you, Jeff. Dr. Kneebone, I have to say, I have mixed emotions about being introduced by one of my former students, because one side of things, I mean, here I am at New England Aquarium, a place I love to come, and he's working here now, and John Mandelman is vice president of the Anderson Cabot Center, and I've worked with John for many, many, many years, and I see these young people grow up and become so successful, and I think it's a great, perhaps it's a good reflection on my mentoring, but at the same time, it makes me feel really old. And yeah, I've been working with sharks for a long time, and most people nowadays do want to hear about the white sharks, and I don't blame you, because they're really exciting, they're really cool, and we've been doing a lot of really interesting things with them. But there are a lot of other sharks in the sea, and I've had the fortunate opportunity to work on many of them over the last 30-something years, and every one of them has been a rewarding experience. But tonight we will center it on my newest friend, the great white shark, and it is now my favorite shark, but I'm a fickle person, and who knows what it's going to be next year. But white sharks right now are really fascinating to me. And I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. It's kind of multimedia. It has some stuff that we shot for television. It's got some videos that have never been on television. It's got some science. I do want to always put science in my talks, because that's why I'm here. That's why I do what I do, because it's great to spend time with these animals, but people say to me, what do you do all winter? And I had a really great winter. I didn't go anywhere. I sat in my office in New Bedford, and I looked at data, and I wrote. And believe me, that's fun. I love doing that. And that's how you know scientists are really odd people, because as much as we like to be on the water, we like to make some sense out of the data we're looking at. So what I'm going to do tonight is, and for those of you who have seen me speak before, you're going to see some slides you've seen before. And I apologize for that, but this is kind of a shotgun blast talk of where it all got started with white sharks in the Atlantic, what's new, what we're learning, the new technologies that we're deploying. And in the latter half part of my talk, I'm going to go into the super new technologies that we've been playing with on white sharks, not only here in the Atlantic, but off the coast of Mexico. So I want you to get a nice broad spectrum look at what we're doing with white sharks, get an appreciation for the species that you probably already have because you're here tonight, but also learn something about what we're learning about it. And the slide I always start with is this one. And this gives you a very, very quick look at the historical perspective of white sharks. And what does it tell you? There's a whole bunch of little green dots, over 600 little green dots, and each one of these little green dots represents a white shark. And this is a compilation by authors Jack Casey, Wes Pratt in 1985, and augmented by work done by another student of mine, Toby Curtis, recently, and been updated. And this is the compilation, historical compilation of every white shark record that we've got off the eastern seaboard of the United States. And this is really, up until about 10 years ago, the state of the art of what we knew about white sharks in the Atlantic Ocean. We knew where they were captured, because most of these green dots represents an interaction with fishing gear. You know, so it's a specimen that was either brought into the docks or sold. It was harvested or harpooned or just captured for the fun of it. But this is a white shark, white sharks that were in many cases landed. So this gives you a sense that they are distributed all the way from the eastern Gulf of Mexico along the eastern seaboard of the United States, largely restricted to the continental shelf, which is that light blue plateau you see along our seaboard, all the way up to Canadian waters. So when people say to you, oh, well, the white sharks are kind of new to Massachusetts, we know from records dating back to the early 1800s that white sharks have been here historically, just not in the kinds of numbers that we're seeing right now. So if we look at these data, and we call these data fisheries dependent because most of them have to do with where fishermen are fishing and capturing and encountering these animals. We look at these data, we can see it's largely a coastal species. So what I want you to do is keep this map. I'm gonna make you work a little bit tonight. I'm gonna have you file a couple of maps in the back of your mind. And this is one of them. I want you to file this map in the back of your mind because at some point in this lecture, I'm going to show you what we've learned about the true distribution of white sharks in the Atlantic Ocean using newer technologies. But it's an elusive shark. If I were to separate each one of these green dots by year, some years you'd have none, other years you'd have one, some years maybe two. It's not a shark that was very easy for fishermen to target and encounter. It was not and therefore it wasn't a shark that was really easy for scientists to study. So most of what we know about the biology of the white shark comes from other parts of the world. And we all know those hot spots, and I'll talk about them a little bit later in the talk. But there are hot spots for white sharks where not only you can go diving with them, but scientists can study them. And so most of what we know about white sharks comes from those other oceans. And almost everything we know about white sharks in the Atlantic came from this single graphic. And it doesn't tell you much about its natural history, its behavior over multiple scales, even its movement patterns over multiple scales. So it doesn't tell us how this animal really lives in this part of the world. So for most of, certainly my life, most of history, we didn't know a lot about white sharks in the Atlantic Ocean. But some of these little green dots would come to the dock. And when I was working for the National Marine Fisheries Service, as Jeff indicated, my early work was going and sampling these fish. And I do a little bit of this still. A lot of my early work was cutting sharks open. You can learn a lot from a dead fish. And I hate to say that, but that was traditional fisheries biology, and that was the way I was trained, in the 90s and in the 80s, going back a ways. We would go and encounter these fish and sample them that fishermen brought in. So here's a little baby white shark that was brought into the dock in Connecticut and shipped to a lab where I was working in Rhode Island. And so this is about the size we thought they were born. And then another one was brought in and harpooned off the coast of Montauk. We went out and sampled that one as well, and this is about the size they get to. So there's a lot of questions when you look at these two fish. How long does it take to get from the little shark to the big shark? How long do they live? Those kinds of things. And by sampling various tissues from the sharks, we could tease out some of that information. A good example is the backbone. We used to cut the backbones out of these sharks. And if you cut the backbone up and stain it, you'd think of it like a tree. You can count rings on that backbone and get a sense of its age. Now, I've just simplified some science, but that's how you do it. You get a sense of its age, you get a sense of its growth rates. So we would go and cut up these sharks. And most recently, we had a chance to cut one up last summer. And I'm going to actually show you a dissection, the video of its dissection. And so you're going to see it really sped up. It's 4 hours reduced down to, I think, somewhere around a minute. And it was a shark that died off the coast of Cape Cod last summer in Wellfleet. It was transported to us to an area where we can dissect it, and we did a traditional necropsy on this fish to try to learn from that dead animal. Because, as I said, most of what we know about the natural history of some of these fish comes from just dissecting them. So this is last summer. Now, I work for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so you know very well I never work this fast. But what you see here is a team of scientists, and they're methodically taking it apart, sampling various tissues from the stomach to look at stomach contents and feeding ecology, to the backbone regarding age and growth, to certain tissue samples from the liver to the kidneys, to the point where this is reduced really to just handfuls of muscle that are left over. And believe me, even those got picked up by locals, taken home and grilled. So the whole thing was utilized. So much of what we knew about the natural history of the white shark in terms of age and growth and feeding ecology came from these kinds of necropsies. What was really nice for me as I got older and the technologies began to change is that I began to move into the realm of studying live animals to learn about their natural history. So when we look at movement ecology, in other words, how do these animals move over fine scales up to broader scales of time and space? There was one pioneering study that was in the Atlantic, as a matter of fact, in the world at the time. And it was conducted by Dr. Frank Carey at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He had heard of a group of white sharks feeding on a whale off of Montauk back in 1979, and he went out there. That was the year I graduated high school. And he went out there, and he had built these tags called acoustic tags. And what the acoustic tag does is it emits a very high frequency ping. So he built these acoustic tags, and he put one on a white shark, and he followed it. And here you can see the publication in the upper left-hand corner that he published a couple of years later, in 1982, with his co-authors. And he followed this shark for about 3 days. And it went from one end of Long Island to the other. And this is what we knew about the movement ecology of the white shark. We had a 3-day snapshot into the life of an animal that likely lives over 70 years old. And that was state of the art. This was a landmark paper because this technology was relatively new. It had never been used before on white sharks. And folks, scientists all over the world clamored to read this paper because it was so fascinating. And why did we know so little about white sharks, and why was this such a significant paper for the Atlantic Ocean? It's because we didn't know about its ecology, like I said before. We didn't know about its biology, and this was giving us a tiny little glimpse. And when Frank Carey wrote this paper, it was at a time when you could write a research paper and add a lot of fun stuff to it. And so he went off on all kinds of tangents, and he talked about, why don't we see a lot of white sharks in the Atlantic? And at the time, he was really smart. He said, we don't see a lot of white sharks because we don't have a lot of seals, because we wiped out most of our seal colonies on the eastern seaboard of the United States. We have driven our seal populations to the brink of extinction. And when you don't have that robust, abundant prey species that white sharks so dearly love to eat, you're not going to see them. They're going to spread out across the Atlantic, and they're not going to aggregate in any area, and therefore we're going to have no opportunities to study them. He did, however, have this tag, and this tag also told him the depth of the animal. So what you see here is kind of a cross-section of the depth of the shark over the course of those few days. And what you can see is the shark is largely staying shallow in what we call the thermocline. But it's also bouncing down to the bottom frequently. And he said, well, white sharks, they can't harvest seals because there's not a lot of seals around, so they're looking for dead whales. So they're bouncing down to the bottom, looking for whale carcasses on the bottom. And this persisted as the only ecological information we had about the white sharks in the Atlantic Ocean. And I want you to put this map also in the back of your mind. All right, so this was state of the art in terms of new technology and what we knew about short-term behavioral ecology of the white shark in the Atlantic Ocean. Well, we mentioned these global hotspots, places where you guys, if you had a little bit of a lot of disposable income, you can go, anyone here go diving with white sharks? Yeah, you got to have a few people here that have done it. Yeah, I had a chance to do that. Uma, you've done it. Yeah, I've done it a few times. And I tell you, it's really fun. It's expensive, but it's fun, and it's usually in one of these areas. All right, particularly South Africa, South Australia, and Mexico, Guadalupe Island, Mexico. All right, these are places where white sharks aggregate predictably, and filmmakers know that. And shark enthusiasts and divers know that, and ecotourists know that, and so do scientists. And so much of what we know about the basic biology of the white shark is in one of these other oceans. But what's the one thing, that common denominator that these hotspots have in common? And it's food that looks like this. All right? Did I hear an awe? Yeah, it's food that looks like this. You show me dense aggregations of seals, pinnipeds, sea lions. You show me dense aggregations of those, and I'm going to show you, and if it overlaps with the general distribution of the white shark, and most of them do, you will see these aggregations form where white sharks will visit them certain times of the year to take advantage of this robust protein source. All right, what white sharks do is they get older, they get bigger, they move away from chasing around little fish to attacking, dispatching, killing seals and harvesting the blubber from them. And that's what they want. They want to move away. They have the capacity. They get bigger, they get stronger, they get faster. Their teeth change to perfect cutting tools, and they move on to bigger prey. And they augment their diet with seals and sea lions. And so, you know where I'm going with this, because in 1972, along the eastern seaboard of the United States, the U.S. Congress passed the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And as a result, over the course of the last 40 years, we have seen seal populations slowly recover on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And it's taken a long time because these are marine mammals. And being mammals, they reproduce very slowly, but they live a long time. And when you live a long time, you can reproduce multiple times. So now we're getting to the point where populations are reaching very high numbers. This is what a beach looks like in Chatham now. And if you show me this much bacon on the beach, I'm going to show you something that likes to eat them, and that's the white shark. And in our experience, we have had the chance to see this happen a few times. Not as many as you'd think. We're on the water 40, 45 times a year, and we have only actually compiled over the last 8 years 13 observations of attacks on seals. This is one that was captured by our spotter pilot. All right? You're going to see a lot of photos by my spotter pilot, Wayne Davis, because he's not only really good at finding sharks, he's really good at photographing them. And this particular shark was really adamant about capturing this seal. But as you can see, the seal being smart is leading him right into extremely shallow water. And this shark had to abort because it got to the point where it threatened its own life to get into these shallows. And so this particular seal survived. But that's not always the case. And we have had instances where the seal is ambushed by the shark. But one of the things we're trying to understand is how the shark is hunting in these areas. And we want to know that because we think it's interesting, but we ought to know that also because for those of you who may not know this, Cape Cod tends to attract people. All right? It's a tourist attraction, some might say. And it's people that go there largely to use the water. There's all kinds of recreational activities out there. So the more we understand about these sharks around these areas that are also densely populated, the better we can equip beach managers with information about the behavior of these animals. So I'm going to show you a short film, a short clip from a video after a shark killed a seal. It grabbed the carcass of the seal and it brought the seal to the vessel. And so this is underwater footage that we captured, again, with a GoPro camera. And you're going to see it run twice. The shark in normal speed, shark swimming toward the vessel, pulling the blubber from the seal carcass as it moved underneath our boat and then swam away. Now, we've only seen this, as I said, we've only seen compiled data from 13 observations of this nature. And this is the shark again. And a lot of these attacks do occur in shallow water, by far less than 20 feet deep, and fairly close to shore. So I can certainly understand why there's some anxiety by local towns when it comes to the presence of this incredible animal in close proximity to some of the most popular beaches on Cape Cod. And so as we get into the data we're collecting, you're going to see how it plays very well into understanding local movements and behavior of these sharks around the Cape. And as a result now of the predictable presence of white sharks off of Cape Cod, we have been able to get out there and move the needle a bit and tag now, since 2009, over 100 white sharks using sophisticated technologies. And so what you see here on the right side is a map of where we've tagged these 105 sharks, most of them. What you see on the left side are examples of the technology that we're using. And now, when Frank Carey did his infamous track back in 1979, most of this technology didn't exist. So there's been a tremendous explosion in technology that has occurred. You know, so I wouldn't feel right if I didn't say when I was at the University of Rhode Island, these things didn't exist, right? You know, we used big I had to walk to school. We used big mainframe computers. You know, we had to use languages like Fortran and BASIC in order to communicate with these giant computers. Desktops didn't exist. And now we're taking them, now we all have a computer that's far more powerful than what I had in college, right in our pockets. And we're not only that, but we're taking these kinds of things and strapping them to sharks to follow them, not only me just following them, but so you guys can follow them at the same time. The technology that still exists is the first one at the top there, acoustic technology that Frank used all those many years ago. Now it's evolved tremendously to the extent that when Frank did his track, he followed that fish for 3 days, and that was thought to be a huge, incredible track. Now we can use these tags for up to 10 years and monitor individual sharks for up to 10 years. So when we talk about fine-scale local movements, we're talking about the acoustic tags. And when we talk about the broad-scale movements, we're talking about the satellite-based technology, which are the pop-up satellite tags you see in the middle there, as well as the real-time spot tags, the real-time smart positioning tags, that when that shark comes to the surface, it reports to a satellite. That satellite then tells me where that shark is, and we might put that on the internet for you guys to be able to follow as well. So that's absolutely remarkable. I mean, Frank Carey, who unfortunately died many years ago, would be rolling over in his grave right now if he knew about how much this technology has literally exploded in the last 15 to 20 years. And what are we learning? You know, what are we learning from this technology? We use a tagging technique that's fairly unique. Most times you turn on television, you see scientists on vessels drawing the sharks to them. And one thing we've learned about the white sharks off of Cape Cod is they're there for the seals, and there's not much I can do to draw them to me. So we end up going to the sharks. And we use a vessel that's been adapted for this. It's a smaller vessel, 26-foot pursuit with twin outboards. It makes it a fast vessel. You can see it has a long pointed nose on it. That's the pulpit of the boat. We tag from the pulpit of the vessel. It also has a small tower on it now so the captain can see the shark. And we use a plane, pictured in the lower left-hand corner, Wayne Davis's plane, to actually locate the sharks. So we go to them. And we go to every shark. We videotape that shark, add it to our catalog, and then we place a tag in it if we have enough time with that shark. Sometimes the sharks aren't so patient with us and they want to take off because they don't like poles being poked in their face. Other times they're cool, they're laid back, and they let us hang out with them, and we're able to put a tag at the base of their dorsal fin. So that's a unique technique that is not typically used. It's used typically for whales and other marine mammals, but not so much for sharks. And it's worked really quite well for us because these sharks are in these areas primarily off the eastern shore of Cape Cod. And what you see in the upper left-hand corner of this is the southern tip of Monomoy Island. And Monomoy Island's a refuge, and that refuge is loaded with seals. The most recent estimates, which are soon to be published, for the numbers of seals in this area is somewhere between 30 and 50,000 seals. And when you're talking about that much potential prey, you're going to talk about a predator that's going to take the chance of going there and trying to feed. So I'm going to show you a short video that a friend of mine made, an amateur videographer made, that shows us some of the work we're doing out there. And I like this video because it's kind of exciting. You know, it's such a cool, it's like a movie trailer. I love it. You want to go see the film, but there isn't one, I'm sorry. I really like that. It's been out for a couple of years, and many of you may have seen it before, but I find it inspirational. I love it a lot. So we go out there and we tag these sharks, and we have been tagging them since 2009. We got over 100 tagged. And when we're out there, you know, we do get observations, and a lot of them come from our spotter pilot, because he's 900 feet on top of the water, right? And he's up there, and he's got the best view. He finds the sharks, and in our best day, he's located 22 individual sharks for us over a 6-hour period, which is absolutely amazing. That's individuals. That means we probably videotaped over 80 sharks. And after we review the video, we actually see that it boils down to 22. And what he's able to capture on film is amazing. And it's very insightful for us in terms of the behavior of these animals. So there's Wayne in his spotter plane. So I'm going to show you a series of photos he took over the last couple of summers to give you a glimpse of some insights into what we see when we're out on the water. And as you can see, we get sometimes fairly close to land. As a matter of fact, we spend most of our time certainly within a half mile of the beach, and many times within a couple of 100 yards of the beach, and sometimes in the surf zone. And I'm on the pulpit of the boat here, and when you're on the pulpit of a boat on the top of a wave, suspended over a white shark, it's what I call a high anxiety moment. There are times when John King, who owns the boat and graciously works with us and has over the years, volunteers his time, he has buried that pulpit into a wave. And I end up really wet but horrified by the fact that I'm actually swimming in next to a shark. But you can see that we sometimes do get very tight to the beach, as these sharks do. You know, they are challenging themselves. And one of the things we've learned over the last few years is the seals kind of figure it out. There's something out there that wants to eat me, you know, and they start to piece it together. Early in the summer, they don't know that, you know. They're like cavalier, carefree. All winter, they just wander wherever they want off the beaches. But as the summer moves on, they realize that the safest place to be is really, really tight to the beach, because a couple of their buddies get hit, you know, and they learn fairly quickly that stay tight to the beach and you're going to be all right. So this is a series of photos that Wayne shot, and I'm going to show you a video associated with it, where you can see clearly the seals, most of the seals are really tight to the beach here. Upper left-hand corner. That shallow water the shark will not go into, all right? You can't tell how shallow it is because of the nature of the photograph, but that's about less than 6 feet deep, and the sharks are right on the ledge of where the wave is gently breaking on the beach. Well, one of the seals, as you can see here, didn't get the memo. All right, so we're there. You could see me on the end of the pulpit, right? And that seal comes swimming out from underneath us. We were watching this shark because Wayne gave us a call on the radio and said, I got a shark over here that's absolutely going crazy. It wants to get to a seal, but it can't get to the seals because they're too shallow. Well, this seal, younger seal, swims out from under our boat, and these two animals encounter each other. Now, for those of you who are divers, any divers in the room, you know, how clear, crystal clear is that Cape Cod water, right? So they don't see each other until they're about a meter apart. So the photo you see here is the shark seeing the seal and the seal seeing the shark. And at that moment, the shark then accelerates to probably 25 miles an hour and goes after the seal. The seal, realizing it can't get away, has one place to go, and that's up. So the next photo that Wayne captured, amazingly, from 900 feet in the air with a telephoto lens, is the shark actually launching itself out of the water in pursuit of the seal. And you can see how close I am to this whole thing happening. And what you see, it's tough to make out, but you see the white jaws of the shark clenching, protruding, extending and clenching shut and missing. And the seal is actually on top of the shark. So I'm going to show you a video clip that is what I saw from the perspective of the vessel. And you're going to see it in real motion there. Nothing changes. And then, boom. And that was like amazing. So my assistant, John Chisholm, slowed it down so you can get a better view of how this happened. You're going to see the seal launch out of the water and the shark come up and miss it. Now, that seal went right up on the beach. It's still on the beach. it's taken to eating land animals. But it's it was an amazing. It was one of the first times we've ever seen a white shark breach, and it did so with really short notice in a really short area in really shallow water. So it gives you a sense of the energetic capacity of these animals and their ability to accelerate over very small spaces. And then we see these kinds of instances, all right? Those of you who love to go to Cape Cod and surf, this is around you every day, all right? We see this all the time. Those are 3 surfers with white shark prowling just outside them. This happens frequently. And it's something that's a reminder to all of us that there's coexistence that's happening here. And many times the person who's coexisting with the shark doesn't know it, like this person here. This windsurfer saw this photo online that Wayne shot, and called us and said, I didn't know that shark was there. I think he sold the windsurfer the following week. But but this happens. This is happening. So we have this overlap of human activity, which I talked about earlier, with shark activity. And the sharks are there to eat the seals. They're not there to eat the people. But we've got to deal with it. And what we have so far is this truce, if you will, and this coexistence. But it's something we're always mindful of. And what we're trying to do is be very open with the public about this. You know, we're not going to be Mayor Vaughn in the movie Jaws. You know, we're going to say, white sharks are here, people are here, let's deal with it, let's educate the people. And much of what we do through the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, through my agency, through outlets like the aquarium here, is educate the public about these animals, because the more you know, the less chance you're going to be afraid of them. And then the more we collect, the more we can share with the public, as well as with beach managers, as the patterns that we're seeing in their movement. So I'm going to go into some of our results, and I'm going to talk about relative abundance. I'm going to talk about distribution and the data we're getting from our acoustic tags, and then I'm going to talk about the broad-scale movements we're seeing, and then I'm going to delve into some other things. How do we tell white sharks apart? This is a shark named Hollywood. Okay, Hollywood was seen it was identified for the first time back in 2014, and we saw Hollywood again in 2016. And how could we tell? Because John Chisholm, my assistant, is an expert at looking at video and determining individual sharks based on color patterns. Scientists have done this with white sharks for years in other parts of the world. But you can see I've circled a couple of the color patterns there. You can see it's tedious work, but that's very distinctive for that shark. Think of it as a fingerprint for that shark. So when we go out and identify individual sharks, when I tell you that we've cataloged individual sharks, this is how we've done it, based on screen grabs from GoPro footage. So far, we've identified almost 280 individual sharks since we started this study. All right? This is where we saw the sharks in 2015 versus 2016. 2015 reflects a little bit our effort. We didn't get up to P-Town very much. We started doing more of that in 2016. But you could see the white sharks are really along the entire eastern seaboard of Cape Cod. All right? These are the numbers of individuals that we identified from 14, 15 to 16. So we saw this increase from 80 individuals to 142 to 147. And the black portion tells you the proportion of those sharks that we saw from previous years. So we're seeing in 2015, we saw about 30% of the sharks from the previous year. In 2016, about 40%. These are the raw data that goes into our population modeling. You know, I've got a very skilled student, PhD student, Megan Winton, who's working on that right now. It's part of her entire PhD dissertation. And so what she's going to come up with is an estimate of the entire population side. But these are the raw data that seed those models. These are the raw data that go into those models. And those are the numbers of individuals. And you base those models on the proportion of individuals you see from year to year. So you can tell from these data already that sharks do come back year after year after year. In terms of, so those are raw numbers. And I hope to derive a population size, like I said, in the coming years. But where are they going? How are they spending their time? And I like to use Julia as one of my examples because she's one of the first white sharks we tagged with acoustic tags back in 2011. Her tag is a 10-year pinger. And she's been pinging back each year since 2011. So she is a shark that loves coming back to Cape Cod. And what's really ironic about Julia, when she comes back, for the first couple of years, she always arrived on Memorial Day weekend. I think it was the arrangement she had with the place she was renting. But she would come back every Memorial Day weekend. So I'm going to show you a little video of Julia here. And with her acoustic tag on her, I'll mute that because it's just me yelling into the camera. But again, this is GoPro footage, and you can see how close we are to the beach. GoPro cameras, as many of you know, is very wide-angle cameras, so we're closer than it looks. This is back when we were tagging with Captain Billy Chapralis in 2011, 2012, 2010 for that matter. He's a professional harpooner. We've moved away from this vessel to a smaller vessel because it's faster, and we can get closer to the sharks. But there's Julia in the beautiful crystal clear water of Cape Cod, hunting in the shallows there, trying to encounter a seal. And we'll get up a little bit close to her, and you'll see on her right side that she's got an acoustic tag there. And that acoustic tag pings away, and what it really does is it just emits a very high frequency ping. And what we do is we set up acoustic receivers all over the area, and anytime that shark swims within a couple hundred meters, a couple hundred yards of that receiver, the receiver picks up the shark, says, "Oh, I heard a ping." Not only did I hear a ping, that's Julia. And I'm going to do a timestamp. Sunday, 2 o'clock, Julia was here. So then we go back, we collect data from those receivers, and we piece together where the sharks spend their time. We know arrival times, we know where they spent their time, and we know when they leave. So we can get a look at their fine-scale movement patterns. It works well if you know your sharks are going to stay in the area. And Dr. Kneebone's work was based using this technology on sand tigers in the Plymouth, Kingston, Duxbury Bay estuary, where he was able to identify specific spots that those sharks wanted to be in, and therefore habitat that could there be protected. So this is on the left side. What you see here, upper right, you see a little graphic of what the acoustic receiver looks like. All right, and each one of these red dots represents an acoustic receiver. So that's the extent of our array from 2000. This is basically our array in 2016. We actually had some receivers out a little further offshore at one point for a study that other members of my agency are doing. But these are where the acoustic receivers are. And the next graphic I'm going to show you is where the white sharks have been detected in the state. So we put in a receiver out and we pick up a white shark. And this particular graphic is also set up in a way that the size of those dots is proportional to the number of sharks that we see in that area. And clearly, that eastern shoreline of Cape Cod, as well as the western shoreline of Cape Cod, emerge as hot spots for those white sharks. And of course, that's because this is where the gray seals are really piled up. This is where the big numbers of seals are, and those sharks are aggregating to those areas where they're most likely to feed. The other dots you could see are much smaller, but they're still occurring there. We've now got receivers, thanks to the town of Plymouth really kicking that off. We've got receivers, along the south shore of Massachusetts as well. So these sharks are visiting there. They're not spending, not large numbers of sharks are going there and not spending a lot of time there, but they're still traveling through these areas. So this gives us a sense of where the sharks are. And then we can look at our acoustic receiver detections and get the seasonality of it. So this is a really simple graphic that tells you that the sharks really don't arrive until June. They don't start ramping up until July, with August, September, and October being our peak months when we detect the most sharks. And then it drops off dramatically as we get into November, December, and they're all gone. So there's a distinct seasonality to this. So the guys I know that love to surf, they said, "I think I'm going to start surfing in December." And they do that. They don't want to deal with this issue, and that's fine. I absolutely agree. If they don't want to take chances, they go surfing in those off months. So now we get this seasonality that we're able to get from these data. And we don't have to be out there looking for them. The receivers are collecting the data for us. So these in 2015, these are all the places where we detected white sharks. So we could start to share this information with individual towns, and we could tell them the seasonality in their town. So that's Truro data, this is Orleans data, and this is Chatham data. And you can see that not all these patterns are the same. There's something going on where the sharks, for example, in September, left the Chatham area and moved up to Truro. Weren't necessarily piled up in Orleans, but the Orleans and Chatham patterns are similar, but Truro's different. So there's some seasonality patterns here within individual areas. So by sharing receivers with towns and really working with the towns all over Massachusetts, we're now getting data that's town-specific that we can share with them and say, well, you've got sharks here during this time period. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of sharing local movement, ecological information with the towns for public safety purposes. But when we talk about broad-scale movements, we really are talking mostly about satellite-based tagging. I'm not going to show you too much of those tags because it's pretty straightforward. You put a tag on the shark, tag either comes up and transmits data to the surface, or the shark comes up with the tag on it, transmits data. So we've pieced all the data we've got from over 30 white sharks tagged to date with this technology. So now this is the time when I want you to think back to those 2 maps I told you to file away. Okay? And we thought of the shark traditionally, historically, as an animal that's largely coastal. It's on the continental shelf. It moves north and south, and it's largely restricted to the shelf waters along the eastern seaboard of the United States. Well, it turns out that that's not true. This is actually what white sharks do in the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see the extent of their movements is far broader than we previously knew. Because when you look at fisheries-dependent data, you may not necessarily get the whole picture because you may only get a reflection of where fishermen are fishing, and not necessarily where the animals are actually going. This is what we call fisheries-independent data. So these data sets give us a sense of what the shark is actually doing over broader scales. And what's really fascinating about the movements of these animals into the open Atlantic, what you see there is movement across the mid-Atlantic ridge. And when they're out there, when they leave the shelf, they start doing something that a few other fish do. They start diving to tremendous depths, and that's what this shows you. The left-hand side of this screen, you see that shallow water behavior. But these big bars that you see, from early December on is when the shark leaves the shelf. That's depth in meters that it's going to. So that's over 3,000 feet deep. These sharks are diving down to in the central Atlantic, and we don't have a clue what they're doing. And they're not the only shark that does that. It's remarkable. The more animals we put this new technology on, the more we realize that they have what we call a mesopelagic habitat residency, where they go down to these depths of greater than 200 meters. So what you see on the top here is a porbeagle shark, in the middle is a basking shark, and in the bottom is the white shark I just showed you. And you can see that they all have these deep diving patterns that they do to great depths. And scientists, these tags are wonderful. We love these tags. We talk about these tags all the time. We'd be lost without them. But the truth is, they tell us where they're going, but they don't tell us what they're doing. So guys like me will stand up here and pontificate about what we think they're doing, and some of us will even talk very authoritatively and say, yeah, they're down there feeding, but we don't know. We have no clue what they're doing. Are they going out there to reproduce? Are they going out there just to hang out? Are the females just going out there because the males harass them near shore and they want to get away from it all? And I can't blame them for that. Or are they actually feeding? We don't know. So I got to thinking about this. We've got these really amazing, remarkable deep diving patterns that a lot of sharks, including the white shark, are exhibiting, and we don't know what they're doing. How do we find that out? So when you're laying in bed at night and you can't sleep because of the dissection video I showed you, I want you to think about how to answer that question and get a big boat, spend $50,000 a day on a big boat, and get a submersible and go find a white shark and film it. That's not going to work. You could strap cameras to them, but those don't work very efficiently. What about we followed one? Well, how do we follow one? And I got to thinking about following one. So there are things we call underwater drones, things we call AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles. And I started thinking a few years ago about what if we followed one with a vehicle? And no one's ever done that. Because most of what we know about white sharks comes from what they do at the surface. Almost every observation of predatory behavior of white sharks comes from watching them at the surface. If they are not at the surface, we don't know how they're feeding. Right, this is a photo I took in Guadalupe of white shark feeding at the surface. So was the previous photo. Everything we know comes from what they're doing at the surface. But if you look at the data we've got from the tags, they probably spend 95% of their time away from the surface and away from us. So if they're not doing what they normally do around us, then we're not knowing what they're doing. So how do we figure that out? And autonomous underwater vehicles have been around. You know, think of it as an underwater robot, underwater drone. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution has built this system for many, many years. They use them to typically map the bottom. They go to great depths. They'll go down to 6,000 meters. They can do things that we can't do. You send a drone on an operation to do something like find a wreckage, find a wreck. They're very good at that. I met with these folks a few years ago and I asked them if it was possible to get them to follow a fish. And they thought it was highly improbable. They said, Greg, we can program our vehicle to do anything but not follow a fish. And the people I worked with was Amy Kukulia and Roger Stokey at Woods Hole Oceanographic Systems Laboratory. And they thought I was crazy. But the more we talked about it, the more we started figuring out a way to do it. I said, well, how do you communicate with your vehicles? And they said, well, we use something called a transponder. I said, what's a transponder? Well, it's about this big, and we put it in the water, and it communicates with the vehicle through underwater, highly sophisticated proprietary underwater modem systems developed by the Department of Defense. I said, well, how big is this thing? Oh, it's about that big. I said, it communicates with the vehicle. I said, yeah, that's what they do. I said, well, what if I put it on a shark? And they said, well, I guess the vehicle would follow the shark. I said, that's what we do then. And so we got together with Discovery Communications and Hui, Woods Hole Oceanographic, and we put together a proposal, and we decided to go out and try to follow a fish. And this is what it looked like on paper, and it looks really cool, right? And think of it as just like a sophisticated game of Marco Polo. It's really what it is, you know. The vehicle says Marco, and the little transponder says Polo. And through underwater communications, the vehicle says, all right, your range is 400 meters, and your depth is 12 meters, and your bearing is 180 degrees. I'm going to go there. And so I just took 40 years of intense development and boiled it down to a very simple child's game, which doesn't make the engineers happy, but that's okay. You're going to find out I tend to make engineers very unhappy. So that was what it looked like on paper. And we went through 5 different phases of development. I'm going to skip the first couple. The first one was have the vehicle follow me with a transponder strapped to my back. And we did that off the coast of the Elizabeth Islands, south of Woods Hole, in murky water, and the vehicle followed me. And it worked, and Discovery Channel loved it, and they said, okay, we'll pay to go to the next level, and the next level, let's follow basking sharks, because they're big, really big. They're a big target. I can put the tag in them. They can carry a tag this big, and we can follow the basking sharks, and they don't go very fast. So we did 2 basking shark tracks, and Discovery Channel said, basking sharks are really boring. We've got to follow white sharks. And the engineers said, I don't know if we're ready for that. I said, it doesn't matter. We're not writing the checks. They are. So we had to go to basking sharks, which was white sharks, which was phase 3. So phase 3, we did 5 missions where we'd go out off the coast of Cape Cod and tag white sharks, try to get the biggest white sharks with this big transponder. And the first 4 missions were great. The vehicle was able to follow the fish, but it couldn't get close enough to film the fish. And it goes back to the beauty of Cape Cod diving, right? The visibility, the turbidity, really problematic. But also, you've got a 3-knot current running any given time there. And you've got a shark that's just cruising 6 knots against that current. You've got a vehicle that couldn't keep up with the shark, and which maxed out at 6 knots. So we had real problems closing the gap between the shark and the vehicle. So although we got really great tracks by an autonomous underwater vehicle, we didn't have what Discovery Channel wanted until we got the final track. So the first bunch of tracks were great. I was super excited about this because when you think back to 1979, Frank Carey put an acoustic tag that he built onto a white shark. He sat on a boat for 3 days with a hydrophone in the water, and he followed it, listening to a horrible, monotonous ping for 3 days. And now I've got a robot doing that for me. So, I mean, that's a huge leap when it comes to technology, and we were super excited about it. But we didn't have the underwater imagery which we wanted. We wanted to see what the sharks are doing. Because ultimately, I want to follow a white shark to the middle of the Atlantic and see what it's doing at 1,000 meters deep. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but that's what I want to do, right? You got to dream big, right? And you got to do these things in baby steps. So the first track, the fifth track, we were absolutely able to get close to the white shark. So here we have a shark that we call large Marge. And Marge is moving along Orleans here, and you can see the vehicle right behind her. So we actually closed the gap between the vehicle and the shark, and we were able to get some footage. And this is actually shot by the vehicle itself. Now, I've got a little video for this. I'm going to skip it because I'm looking at the time, and I think you guys would rather see the other videos I'm going to show you. I've got a few minutes left. But this is imagery captured by a drone off the coast of Cape Cod of Marge. And what I love about this is Marge is a big, reproductively active female, and these scars you see on her are from other sharks. And they might be indicative of mating scars, which means that mating may be occurring off Cape Cod. So this tiny little track where we got a little bit of video of a white shark was very informative for me from a scientific perspective. And Discovery Channel liked it. They thought it was really great. And they agreed to continue to fund the project to phase 4. But they didn't want to do it at Cape Cod. They said, the visibility there isn't very good, Greg. Why don't we go to a place where there's nice, clear water? And I said, well, there is an island off the coast of Mexico called Guadalupe, where the visibility is, I don't know, maybe 200 feet. And the sharks are there in huge numbers, and predictably. And there's scientists have been studying white sharks there for many, many years, and I think it would be a great opportunity to track white sharks in an environment where we could actually see them and see what their behavior is and see what they're doing. And this all sounded great again on paper. So in 2013, we've started putting together a research trip to go there. And I contacted a Mexican scientist that I had read about. I read his work, and he was clearly doing cutting-edge stuff out there. And I asked him, I said, Mauricio, I said, Dr. Hoyos, what's the big question you have about white sharks interacting with seals out there? And he goes, Greg, you know, we see lots and lots of white sharks, and we see lots and lots of seals. And sometimes we see white sharks occasionally eating a seal carcass, and sometimes we see seals on the beach with scars, but we never actually see the white sharks eat the seals. I said, well, what's your working hypothesis, you know? Science talk. What's your hypothesis? And he said to me, I think because the water clarity is so good here that the seals can see the sharks coming from a mile away. You know, and seals, when I was at Guadalupe, I've been there a few times now, inevitably you see a white shark swimming and a seal swimming around it. You know, you can't get me kind of stuff. And that happens every day, because once the prey is seen by once the predator is seen by the prey, it's over, the game is over. And white sharks have to attack with speed and stealth. And the only way they can do that in crystal clear water, Mauricio told me, is if they go down deep. They hang down 100 meters deep, and they just wait for the seals to come overhead. I said, do you have any proof of that? He goes, only every now and then I see a carcass come to the surface and a shark eating it. I said, well, it sounds good, but what if I told you I had a vehicle that I can take out there and we could follow a white shark and see it eating a seal? And he goes, oh, I love that idea. Let's do it. So Discovery loved the idea, and we went out there in 2013. And we tagged 4 white sharks for 6 missions. And again, the transponder's big. And now, you guys see the transponder. Just know one thing. I get the transponder back. And I get it back because it's expensive, because we don't want the shark dragging around this big transponder, and because the engineers would freak out completely if we didn't get this $10,000 piece of equipment back. And so we placed the transponder on with the standard tagging technique. I've built a harness for my tagging pole, and we use a small intramuscular dart that goes at the base of the dorsal fin. So I'm gonna show you a video clip of us tagging Deep Blue, which is considered to be one of the largest white sharks ever filmed, and certainly the largest white shark I have ever seen. And to give you a sense of how big this shark is, I'm going to tell you that's a 21-foot small boat. And this is all shot with a drone. And I'm on the stern of that boat, and you're going to see Deep Blue turn around, take notice of our bait, and I'm going to put the tag at the base of her dorsal fin. And you could scale it yourself, but this is a shark that's over 19 feet long, probably close to 20 feet long. And clearly one of the biggest fish I've ever seen. Yeah, it's just a fish. So as soon as the shark is tagged, we launch the vehicle, and the vehicle goes in the water, and we follow the shark. Right? And this all sounds good on paper, and the work that these engineers did to adapt the vehicle to follow a fish is absolutely amazing, because think of the fish as a randomly moving object, because it is. That's all it is. And what Roger did, and Roger's really the software engineer behind this. I can't say enough about his skill set, but he's developed this. He's tweaked the software to the extent that the vehicle's trying to not only identify where the shark is, but it's trying to predict where it's going so it could stay with the shark. And it does this every 3 seconds based on the algorithms he's written. So the vehicle we used was the Remus 100. The Remus 100 is one of their smaller units. It's about 8 feet long. It's easy to lift with 2 people. Very portable, easy to ship to Mexico, all those kinds of things. We adapted it with simple GoPro cameras. All right, so there's no real great technology there. The big limitation, this is what really got us. The big limitation to Remus 100 is it only goes down to 100 meters, so 300 feet deep. That became a problem for us. So I'm going to show you a couple graphics like this and some video. This shows the vehicle and the shark. And you can see for most of this track, the shark is less than 100 meters deep. And the vehicle is doing an incredible job of staying with the shark. So we're getting great footage of the shark as long as it's less than 100 meters. You could see near the latter part of this track, the vehicle can't follow the shark below 100 meters, because if it does, it will implode. Now, me, being the adventurous type, said, oh, send it down. We'll see what happens. Engineers, not so much. So I'm going to show you a little video clip here to give you a sense of what it looks like from the 6 cameras. And we pieced together all the camera angles. And I'll have some. So what you hear there is the engine of the AUV itself. So the camera systems are pretty straightforward. One's looking up, one's looking down. That's the underwater modem. Okay, that's the vehicle communicating with the transponder. You got a camera looking right, a camera looking left. And this is approaching Marge as she's swimming along the bottom at Guadalupe Island at about 30, 40 meters deep. So it really gave us an incredible view of this animal. And you can get a lot of, I mean, from a scientific point of view, I'm thinking, okay, we can get tail beat frequency, we can get behavioral observations, we can get depth, we get a sense of what this animal's doing, not only by looking at data, but by looking at the shark. And that camera on the lower left, you could see, is pointing back. So that gives you the perspective of what we could see that's never been seen before. How are these animals behaving down at 100 and 150 feet deep? So that was all well and good. We loved it. Stuff coming back was very informative, was interesting. We wanted to see what these sharks were doing, how they were behaving. And then we realized that not all of our sharks were staying shallow. Here's a great example of a shark. She's Lupita, big female. We tracked her for 2 hours. She spent almost all of her time below 100 meters. Well, this doesn't make for good TV. All right, this doesn't make for good TV. I'm loving the fact that we're staying with the shark. We're getting data from the shark. We're able to do a track, an acoustic track with a vehicle, all done with a drone. We're monitoring it from the ship. It's really cool. But the producer's coming apart because he's going, Greg, I don't want to just see blue water. That doesn't do anything for Shark Week. It really doesn't. And I've learned that these are a bunch of neurotic people too. You know, it's just the way we all are to some extent. So for me, it became a real problem because we were just getting blue water. So I'm going to show you a section of the video here where the vehicle's stuck at 100 meters deep, or we actually kept it at about 96 because we had to be fairly conservative. And we were waiting for the shark to come back up, which is really boring video. Of course, many of you know differently, right? Who jumped? Well, the shark came back up, but it wasn't the one we were tracking. That's the vehicle screaming. It's listing and now screaming. And the shark is wondering, why aren't you dead? The engineers are coming apart. You'll see the shark now swim behind it, get a little closer, swear at it. You're going to see it swear at it in just a second. In shark speak, I don't speak it, so I don't know what it says, but you can only imagine. Ah! I think it's something like, to heck with you. Well, suddenly the producer got real excited. Not so much the engineers. So I'm going to show you another film clip from the perspective of multiple cameras. Oh, sorry. I'll show you that in a second. And I am winding things down. So again, the multiple camera system. I want you to look at the one that's looking down and back. So that's the lower left box. That's the vehicle's communicating with the transponder. Transponder's saying, I'm way down deep. You can't see me. Just stay where you are. Don't worry, you're going to be all right. And then out of nowhere comes a shark named Lucy. You can only watch for the paint chips. Paint chips. Yeah, give it a bump, a little bump there. There's Lucy, her tail's like that. Mauricio's he's loving life. Mauricio's saying, this proves my hypothesis. The sharks hang very deep, they wait for things to swim overhead and they eat them. I said, you're absolutely right, and we published a paper on it after that. Well, Discovery loved it, everybody loved it. The only people who really didn't love it were the engineers. See, I'm so used to putting things in the water and not getting them back. The engineers don't feel that way. But they slowly adapted to it, and we went on to film a couple more shows after that. And I'll show you highlights from, and that's the vehicle, by the way, after the fact. That's what a vehicle looks like after it's been attacked. 10 times by 10 different sharks over the course of 3 days. So we went to phase 5, and I'll show you one last film clip, and I'll wrap things up. And it was, again, to go back to Guadalupe and to do something new and different. For me, from a scientific point of view, I wanted to take it to the next level. I always want to advance the science. I want to advance the technology. Okay, we saw what the sharks were doing at 100 meters. Let's go down to deeper depths. The sharks are deeper than us. Let's follow them. And we went in December when the elephant seals move into the area. And we brought mother of Remus 100, Remus 600. And so that's her there on the left side of your screen. So we figured we'll bring the giant unit. They'll never eat that, right? I'm wrong a lot. That's one thing I've learned over the years is actually I'm wondering when I'm right. Especially after I had kids, I realized I'm never right. And they remind me of that. And so I'll show you the last video clip from this film where we went to great depths and we went into the night for the first time to film white sharks. We want to go deeper into the night, we want to deploy longer, we want to follow these fish, have a vehicle that can just plow right through that depth limit, go down to as deep as 2,000 feet. We've got cameras, we've got lights, so we can turn it all on and see what the animals are doing. I love that. Yes! Yes, 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 yes! Woo-hoo-hoo! Game on!
It's been attacked! It's
hit.
Been attacked! There's bite marks on the bottom! Unbelievable. Here, look at these bite marks. Huge bite marks across the steel. Look at, you can see it. I have to say I'm absolutely shocked that there's a shark big enough out there capable of doing such damage.
Now Shark Cam 2 is in the water, and for the first time, we are tracking a great white shark into the night. Amazing, going to places, seeing things we've never seen before. And this is just the beginning, you know? This is just the first track. What's gonna happen tomorrow? What's gonna happen a year from then? What's gonna happen with all the other animals we can track? Absolutely blows my mind. Good, what's gonna happen here? So this is,
Uh-oh.
Oh! Oh my gosh! Was it her?
It was. I told you.
So a lot of my work, I'm going to wrap things up, is supported not only by my agency, but by the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, which supports research like mine, as well as education, public outreach. If you live in Massachusetts and do not have one of these yet, you should get one. It supports our work. And it's not only got white sharks on it, but if you're a bluefish and striped bass fan, we've thrown those in as well. I want to thank a whole bunch of people that over the years and foundations that have supported my work. I've got a couple books out there, a couple that I wrote, and then one that's about our work by Cy Montgomery. But I'll stick around as long as you guys want and answer questions, but thanks so much for your attention tonight.
I watched your episode and I noticed Shark Cam got trapped underwater in the rock. How did you feel?
Yeah. This particular episode, which aired last year, didn't it? I don't watch them. It aired last year, and the way this particular episode ends is the large vehicle is following a big white shark, and the white shark is patrolling around this beach, and the vehicle goes under a ledge and gets stuck, and we have to leave it there, and that's when I really saw an engineer cry. But Amy is amazing. She's an amazing person, just an incredible scientist. She went back twice and retrieved it the second time and was able to get it out. Yeah, but it was very disheartening to actually lose that, multi-million-dollar vehicle while we were tracking a shark. Yeah, that was the big Remus 600.
A lot of the sharks that you're able to tag are females, and I wondered if there's a reason why that is. Yeah,
a lot of the sharks I highlight here are females. I don't know why. I don't know if it's my habit or not, but we actually see more males than females. And ever since we've been doing the individual identification work for this is coming up on our 4th year, we're getting a really good idea of sex ratio, and it's almost 2 to 1 males to females. It's just that my females have been so exciting, and I got to know them much longer period of time. And the males tend to be smaller and skittish. There are a couple of my favorite males, James, Salty. I didn't include them in this talk tonight, but yeah, it's actually a 2 to 1 ratio of males to females. It's a personal bias. I don't know why. I think my females have done some really exciting things.
How big was the 600 unit? And
how big is the 600 unit?
And can you measure the speed when they're coming up to attack it with the device you have on it?
Yeah, what I've got on the shark, in addition to the transponder, gives us incredible information on the depth of the animal, and so we know time, we know depth, and we can get a sense of speed and therefore acceleration. So we are actually able to do that. The problem we had is, in most cases, it's not the shark we're tracking that's attacking the vehicle, But one thing I can tell you is these are full-blown attacks where the animal is clearly, using great speed and stealth and force and not stopping. We did have one shark that shot straight up, realized last second that it wasn't edible. I mean, probably a shark with more experience said that's a chunk of metal or whatever, and then stopped sniffed it, and then shot right back down. And I thought that was really cool because you could see the shark invert itself and then swim actively back down like, uh-oh, my cover's been blown. I got to get back down in the darkness in case a seal goes over or a tuna fish or whatever you're feeding on. So again, we hypothesize they're feeding this way. We just don't know what they're feeding on. Peter?
You started with a little shark. How small now have you seen them?
We started with, how small have we seen them around Cape Cod?
Well, ever.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's, there are pockets of small sharks, particularly in the New York Bight off New Jersey, Long Island, where you can get them as small as newborn, which is about 4 feet. About 4 feet is about the size they're born. It's not a bad size to be born at, because you're going to survive for the most part, unless a bigger shark comes around.
When the sharks, when they grow, do they live with other sharks, or do they live alone?
When the sharks grow, do they live with other sharks? It's a great question, and we think of the white shark as being largely solitary. So we see them together because they're aggregating, we think, to Cape Cod or to Guadalupe or to Seal Island in South Africa because there's a food source there that they all want. And you do get competitive interactions, social interactions. A bigger shark might say to the smaller shark, get out of here, this is my area, my territory, if you will. But they generally, when they move off and spread out, they're alone. Is there a difference between testosterone and aggressiveness between males and females? Yes, obviously males have much higher testosterone, but whether that translates actually to aggression has yet to be demonstrated. It's thought to be the case perhaps in bull sharks, but that's a very old paper just basically measuring testosterone levels. So I don't think there's any good empirical data to demonstrate that it's actually linked to more aggression. I don't even know whether we can call it aggression unless we're talking about intraspecific interaction. I think when you talk about, so we often say that shark bit a person, it's an aggressive animal. Well, no, the shark is making a mistake and biting that person because it thinks that person is food. So that's a feeding event. Is it something we translate as being aggressive? So when you're feeding, are you aggressive? I mean, so semantics are very tricky here when it comes to, feeding events. And, I've been told by some, don't use the word attack. It's not good. It's not a good word to use. But then again, if the shark is charging something with its teeth, is that an attack? I kind of think it is, but then again, I mean, so, that's the world we live in, right? But yes, sir. Yeah, I think, we've, Jeff, John, Mark, we've worked on sharks collectively for years, studying their behavior, and what's really come into play is the new technologies. I think one of the things you're alluding to is the fact that we've got these sharks, we've got these seals, and we're not really tracking the seals. And I'd like to, because for me to understand the predator, I got to understand the prey. And but we've just initiated a study with a number of groups, the Seal Consortium here in the Northeast, to start tracking seal behavior. As a matter of fact, the first tags went out 2 days ago on seals. So I'm super interested in what the seals are doing. But I think it's very important to know what the prey are doing, because they're going to dictate what the sharks are doing.
Have you done genotyping of sharks at all, with taking tissue samples? Because I've read in other, South Africa or Australia, they do that, and looking at isolated versus if there's any crossover.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do sample tissue. We all do. We sample tissues for geneticists. I work in particular with a fellow who's currently at the College of Charleston. He's moving soon, but Dr. Gavin Naylor. So I ship all my tissue samples to him, and he's looking at the molecular biology of these animals, not only in terms of broader population dynamics, but also finer scale analyses to even come up with effective population size estimates using genetics. It's not my particular area of expertise. One thing I've learned long ago is that what I am able to do is actually quite limited. So, I'm more than happy to share and collaborate with others and get the real experts doing those aspects of it. But yeah, it's critically important. As a matter of fact, we'll be doing more tissue sampling this year.
Populations stay relatively consistent down at the Cape, and about how many seals are killed a year by the great whites?
Yeah, great questions. I think both of them are tough to answer in terms of what's the size of the seal population. Is it growing? Is it stabilized? Has it plateaued? We don't know that. We know that it's been an upward trajectory I don't think it's plateaued yet. I think when you talk to the folks who have done some population work, we know that the entire, for example, the gray seal population on the eastern seaboard, which basically goes from Long Island to Canada, that's about 500,000 plus individuals. And we know that that has been growing. And the more recent work specific to Massachusetts and Cape Cod shows that there's clearly been a dramatic increase over the last 15 to 20 years. In terms of what the population's doing, it's thought to, at some point, it's going to plateau. Now, what you're getting at in terms of how many seals do white sharks eat is a great question. You know, there are a lot of people out there that hope the white sharks prune the herd. You know, particularly friends of mine who are commercial recreational fishermen who deal with interactions with seals all the time. There's a lot of people out there who think that the restoration of the seal population isn't such a great thing. And they want to know whether, do white sharks eat enough seals to actually, you know, keep that population in check? And we really don't know that, you know. We've only seen, what did I say, 13 interactions between white sharks and seals. And so, you know, based on my data, they never get to feed on these things. But we know it's happening because these sharks are staying around. You don't hang out in the cafe unless there's food being served, right? You're going to get out of there. It's, in terms of even people I know who've been watching sharks and seals in Seal Island, for example, I asked a colleague of mine, I said, how many seals can a shark eat in a day? And he said, I once saw one shark eat 7 seals in one day. I said, that's amazing, you know? But then they might not feed for weeks. It's all opportunistic. You know, something I hope we can tease out of our data over time. Yes? What's the biggest shark I've ever seen? And I really do think it's deep blue. I really do. That deep blue is, you know, I put her at 19.5 feet. I'm fairly conservative when it comes to estimating size of fish. I think the Discovery producer put it at something around 35 feet long. But all the way down. Yeah.
Do baby great white sharks stay with their parents? Well, yeah, do they, and how long
do baby great white sharks stay with their parents? The answer is no. No. Sharks do not take care of their young. Their young want to get away from their mother and father pretty quickly. And so there's no maternal care, parental care at all in sharks.
The first shark that you tagged in Noshawn, where the tag popped off, were you able to collect any data to find out whether she was one of the ones that came back?
Anybody remember that event, 2004, Noshawn Island? White sharks swam into a salt pond. Yeah, my first real encounter with a white shark in the U.S. And we put a tag in it. And once we put a tag in it, very quickly, it was a pop-up satellite tag. It was within 2 hours of meeting that fish, you know, September 27th, 2004 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I put that tag in. And the tag stayed on that shark for the whole 2 weeks it was trapped in that pond. And I watched that tag every day as that shark swam by. And ultimately, we were able to get the shark, after a very long story and a whole separate talk, out using high-pressure water pumps and nets and all kinds of things. And we got it out. And within 45 minutes after we got that out, guess what happened, right? The tag came off. So you know what I learned about that shark, looking at all those data? That it was trapped in a salt pond for 2 weeks. What's your other question?
I mean, is that one of the sharks? Did you have enough data to find out whether that was one of the sharks that has come back in the past?
We have plenty of video of that shark, but she has not been seen again. No, she's not returned. Gretel was her name. Gretel, lost. She was lost, Gretel.
The second question was, do you think the noise on the AUV has any impact
It might.
on behavior?
Yeah, I mean, the noise might attract the attention of the shark, you know, particularly the low-frequency sound associated with it. A lot of people said to me, well, it's metal, it's generating electricity. Keep in mind, when it comes to shark electrosensory perception, it's a near-field sense. So the shark really has to be within 3-4 feet of that to sense that electricity, so the shark's not feeling the electricity and going to the vehicle. I think it's a visual cue. Quite possibly there's some low-frequency signature as well associated with it. But it's whatever it's doing the wrong thing for a vehicle. The right thing for us, but the wrong thing for the vehicle. That young man back there, How do white sharks mate? I always get that. Yeah. Well, the mother shark and the father shark get together, and then mom and dad are going to talk about that later with you. Mom then has developing young in her, and she gives birth to tiny babies that are about this big, you know, up to 14 of them after about a year to year and a half gestation period. Great question. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. I'll tell you guys later. I can only do 2 more, but I will stick around if you meet where we go after this. We go someplace. Yeah, I'll go in the lobby after this, and then we'll all get kicked out. What are my future projects? Well, it's recruiting young talent like these guys to work with me, but they're already working with me. I mean, the genetics work we're doing, Nick Whitney, who's here at the Anderson Cabot Center, is an expert when it comes to fine-scale movements using accelerometry. We did a little bit of that before, and I want to continue to doing it. I think looking at the energetics of these animals in terms of how they move over really, really fine scales with high-resolution data is exciting. And working with Nick, we're going to do more of that kind of stuff. I think I'd like to use some of the newer technologies as well, some of the newer satellite technologies. And, you know, I'm always going to keep wishing that my AUV gets to the point where I can send it on a mission to the middle of the Atlantic to follow a white shark. I might be a really old guy sitting on a front porch somewhere, you know, drinking a Bud Light and complaining about these young guys, but I eventually do want to see that happen at some point, and it might not necessarily be this technology, but it's going to be very similar technology. But yeah, I'm always, I got to just keep leveraging Discovery Channel, and that's not working right now. And then one more question.
Greg, speaking of the research you've done, have you noticed any areas, or you guys scientifically figured out any areas where they are mating, where you've got data to support?
So, you know, some of the big questions we're trying to answer, and you bring it up, and it's, you know, where do they go to mate? Where do the females go to give birth to their young? You know, those kinds of fairly simple questions that you would think we would know by now. But when you look at over 500 species of sharks, it's remarkable of how few we know this information about. So no, in looking really hard at the broad-scale movement data we've got some hunches, but I don't think we have enough data to demonstrate. For example, we see 2 general patterns. I just threw you up a bunch of stuff when it comes to that broad-scale movements, but we have a lot of sharks that just remain coastal, so they just do the green dot thing, up and down, north and south, like a bunch of snowbirds going to Cape Cod, you know, in the summer and down to Florida in the winter. That's what they do. And then for some reason, there's a subset of our animals that decide to just, hey, I think I'll go swim in the middle of the Atlantic. We don't know what triggers that. It happens with big boys, big girls. Typically, it has not happened with juveniles. So at some point, they graduate to the level with, I want to go out to the Atlantic. I don't know why. But there's some reason for doing that, because you're not going to go that far, spend all that energy if you're not benefiting from it, at least from an energetic point of view. So no, we're not there yet, but I think I got a few years left in my career, although the guy next to you is gunning for it. And I'm going to hopefully answer a few of them. But thank you all for coming out tonight. It's been a real fun, real pleasure. Thank you. New England Aquarium.